tonight. And then what you do is you send them what's known as a little ping. It's completely free for them to come and join us or not. But yeah, it helps us build the room up too. Adam, good evening. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing okay. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. So let me just go through. I'm just gonna have a little look through myself. And yeah, so Adam, obviously we've gone for quite a bit of a niche sort of heading tonight. Multiple personalities. Now we're not talking psychosis or anything of the such like that. What are we talking about?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it means many different things. I mean, the title alludes to what used to be known as multiple personality disorder, and now the correct term would be dissociative identity disorder. And it's one of those psychological disorders, if you want to call it, that is very popular in Hollywood. So probably the most recent, very mainstream movie was Split, Shyamalan's film. Is it John McAvoy that kind of played the lead character and all the different kind of characters in there? James McAvoy, that's it. It was a J. But so the title alludes to multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder. But in my opinion, that is an extreme example where subpersonalities, multiple parts of an individual, pretty much don't know of each other's existence. And yet each of them can be in the executive making decisions. And at some level, I think we've all had similar experiences to that, where there's a part of us that seems to be doing something in conflict with other parts. The key difference, of course, is that these parts are normally aware of each other. So it's rare for us to have amnesia of what we do, but we're still aware that we're doing it. And it really relates to this idea of only one single part can be in control in the executive at any one point in time. But while they're in control, they're leading from their subpersonality, their priorities. And this theory has very many different kind of titles, terms, depending on the psychologists or the researchers. So everything from, parts, if you're looking at kind of NLP or ego states, if you're more kind of aligned with Emerson, or resource states is where he evolved it to. But effectively, it's the same principle that we have multiple parts within our subconscious mind, each having the ability to be in control and make decisions. So that element of self-sabotage really comes, I think, in my experience working with different clients, normally from conflicted parts at some level or conflicted ego states. And that's really what I thought we'd be talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, parts, resourceful states and everything can be very, very difficult to understand in some cases, but also it can be very easy to work with, because at the end of the day, it's the person who's got to be able to access them areas. And clearly the use of suggestion can very quickly bring that aspect into light, be where it is. Now, you and I remember from when Mike Mandel spoke about resourceful states, and he likes to use the term of a basement, where everyone has all these different personalities at some point in a basement, but it's only the moment that personality is willing to come out the basement to show itself that it will bring itself into the limelight. And whether someone's doing it, whenever a personality is coming out, the person will never necessarily know that something's changing, but all they will do is notice how they may perform to a certain scenario. Now, obviously, one of the big ones could be people who are drinking alcohol. All of a sudden, you see a completely different personality there. When someone gets angry, again, different personality and such like as well. And yeah, tonight we wanted to get talking. Is these different personalities self-sabotaging our lives? A lot of people who we have as clients say how they're self-sabotaging themselves, whether it's to do with weight, whether it's to just do with anxiety, anything personal based. And we want to chat about this evening, because if we, if we as therapists can find a mutual ground, probably a difficult term, but a mutual ground of areas to work with, although every client's different, it's always going to assist us to create the best outcome possible that we can. And yeah, so multiple personalities. When can we think about this? Now, a lot of people have been watching Angela Black recently on BBC. Adam, have you watched that at all?
I haven't. No, I'm curious about it though. What's it about?
Yeah, so it's a program about a lady whose partner who's been controlling her to basically get control of the children, but to the point where he's actually making her believe that she's doing something in her life completely different. And it's a very narcissistic sort of approach, but it comes to the point where she's actually agreeing as to what she's doing. Now, is that creating a different resource state because the anchoring of the different events? And obviously, if anyone here in the audience is watching it, the many different anchoring up moments, whether it's the blood goose you meet, whether it's the different scenarios that he's prepped and set her up for, that makes this whole thing completely different, that inadvertently makes these different personalities. And obviously from these sort of events, this is what makes our brains believe that in certain areas at certain times we should be reacting in that way. Now, obviously, it's not always correct. It can't always be correct, because what Adam's belief is in something, my belief is in a different way. I'm sat here currently with my Man United top on, and I can guarantee someone else in the audience is going, "Oh my God, that's disgusting, Graham. Why would you wear it? You don't want to see what my mustache looks like for November." Okay. So obviously when it comes to these different conflicting thoughts, what one person may believe is right, the other person can believe is completely wrong. And obviously it comes down to these values. For all of you know, I'm in the military, and I have very strong beliefs for today, for the act of remembrance, everything that's been going on for today. Whereas some people would have different thoughts on that too. So let's get discussing about all these different areas and stuff too. If you've got an example, please feel free to share. If you've had a client with something, obviously keep confidentiality in place where it is, but please feel free to come up on stage. As we're just to remind anyone, if you are new, we do record this, we do put it on YouTube for reminder of eyes later if you so wish to watch it or to share with friends. And yeah, so Adam, anything from you with that?
I think one of the key things, like if we're looking at ego state, parts therapy, whatever it might be, it's important to remember this is just a model, and at some level, like any model, it's simply whether it's useful or not. So you don't have to believe that there are, as Mike Mandel would describe it, a bungalow inside your mind with, the floor with your, almost like the Pareto principle, those 20% of your 50 to 150 ego states that are probably responsible for 80% of all of your behavior. They're on the front floor of the bungalow. And then you've got these, other 80% of your, kind of sub-personalities down in the basement. And then you've got the vaded ego states somewhere in the bunker that are kind of traumatized. It's just a model. And, in my experience, it's a useful model to have this kind of theory that there are different parts in your subconscious, because if there is a conflict there between the parts and between the intentions, and you can resolve that, meeting the need of the positive intention in a different way, and you can resolve that, then actually you encounter different resistance. And for me, the turning point into my level of belief in these kind of different subconscious parts was when I was working with a man who was addicted to crack cocaine. It had already caused a lot of damage in his life. He'd lost many teeth, fingernails, a lot of property. He was a farmer. A lot of his family members had kind of rejected him. It had caused a lot of damage. And he clearly wanted to change because he was there, in my therapy room in Harley Street, desperate not to lose what he had. And yet when I was doing parts therapy with him, and I said, look, now I want to communicate to the part responsible that doesn't want to let go of this addiction, really wants to continue using this substance. I don't know if you've seen, the Smeagol and Gollum kind of scene in Lord of the Rings and that kind of stuff, it terrified me because his mannerisms shifted so much. He went from this kind of guy really eager to make a change in his life to this kind of selfish, vicious, all the mannerisms was kind of like angry and kind of, very absorbed. And he clearly wasn't doing it consciously, but it accessed a different part of his subconscious mind that would do anything to continue having this crack cocaine. And at that point, the model for me became really real because he looked different. His mannerisms were different. And clearly, when he's using crack cocaine, he's not thinking about his fingernails, his teeth, his financial resources. He's in a completely different state. That part of him that is obsessed is in the executive. It's in control. It's making the decisions. And this is how you can have people that will steal from their own family members, do things that they would never dream of doing because a different ego state, a different resource state is in control at that point. So for me, it's a useful model, but it is still just a model. There's no way of detecting, the actual validity of all these different subconscious minds. But like any model, if it's useful and it can create a change, then, why not use it? Sally, welcome up on the stage.
Hi, Adam. Hi, Graham. Thank you for inviting me up.
Hi, Sally.
Hi, how are you? All right?
Yeah, good. All good. All good.
Good. It was interesting this came up tonight because I've recently become an IEMT practitioner, and a lot of the identity work really reminded me of ego states and parts therapy. And why I mention it was because I was involved. I did part of the demo, so I was worked on as part of the demo for the identity states. And the change in me has been unbelievable. And I did a demo last night in one of my Facebook groups, the Jacqueline, the cohort that I trained with, and they all loved it. And I've got like 3 people lined up sessions now in terms of identity. So I don't know what you know about IEMT, if you practice it, or I just thought about, it sort of fits in with this, in my mind anyway. So I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are it's, obviously similar principles to EMDR. And one of the key things that for me maps across quite well with ego state or resource state or parts therapy is that you've got to get back to the original state that has this kind of reaction, the sensitizing event or whatever it might be. And at that point, effectively, whether you call it a pattern interrupt or whether you call it, processing or disassociation or whatever you call it, effectively, it's resolving something or changing how you feel about something in that moment. So for me, the main similarity there is that you've got to get that part in the executive before you start working on it. Did you feel any changes, Sally, like when the demo was happening on you, and you got into that state, the state where the issue was? Did you feel any difference in you before the IEMT started?
Well, I obviously knew obviously the memories that I had and what they were to do with. And to be honest, it had quite a profound effect on me after the demo, and everybody said about how much I looked different and I held myself different, and that's carried on changing. And I think that for me, it was based around, because it's normally based around something that you want to improve. And my struggle has been going between sort of self-employment rather than being employed. And how it was sort of described, how Matt sort of described it was, you need all your team on board, and that was your team, and getting them to the same state of mind, and that's the sort of intention behind that, is getting all these identities, to the same stage, so we can all work as one. if that makes any difference. And I've carried on feeling that change, and I'm definitely different since that demo. So for me, it was really good. And the people that on the training that witnessed it were like, wow, you're so different afterwards.
Yeah.
But it really reminded me of that parts work and, the ego states and everything like that, but sort of bringing them up to the parts within that identity up to present day, if you like, and not acting from a place of, I don't know, some sort of trauma or some sort of emotional issue, and all mine became calm rather than have mess around them. So for me, I got a lot out of it, and that's why I'm quite excited about to use this therapy personally. And I'm going to be concentrating on that for a while as a standalone thing.
I think that's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, really good. Sally, can I just check that I'm coming through loud and clear? I had a couple of messages that I was sounding quite quiet before.
You were quiet. I find it's always better when you're on stage, for me anyway. I don't know if my phone, I could hear Adam quite loud. You were quite quiet, but now I'm on stage.
Okay, I'm moving closer to my microphone. I've tried adjusting it. If anyone can message us, just let us know. But yeah, no, Sally, that's really good. And obviously, I know you're a kinetic shift practitioner as well. Yeah. And it's very much the same principle for that as well. You need to find, if ever you just went to someone, just said, "Oh, try this," and then try and KS them. You'll always get some sort of reaction, but you'll never get the same reaction as being able to get that person to live, feel, smell, reenact exactly what was going on at that time. You always need to be able to completely effectively hit that moment, and the only way to get them to do it is go back and think, as we've shared with Barry Neal and stuff in the past, acuity listening. Being able to get someone to actively really just get them to have that moment of where that point, never just ask them to go back to it, ask them how they felt before, or ask them just, when they've gone past it. And I know you're all therapists and things as well, but if you can get that moment where that shoulda happens, where that reactive cell where that person can't control the idiomotor of what's happening, then that is you hitting whatever resource state's coming forward again, the memory state, whatever it is. And clearly from the course, and I've hosted Matt before when he did the demo of IEMT, and the reactions he got just from a little video on Zoom was absolutely amazing as well. So it's really good to hear that your training went so great, and you got some really good really good work from it yourself.
Yeah, and that's what I demoed last night, is the memory exercise that. Excuse me, I'm eating. I shouldn't talk in my mouth full. The memory exercise, and the results people got were from 8 down to 0 in terms of the emotion around the memories, just on that one short demo. Now it was, it's a standalone memory. It was something that was not, I asked them not to pick anything that was too traumatic. Just a sense of annoyance maybe, or frustration or something like that. But yeah, they all, most of them reported, good changes. And like I said, I'm working with 3 people next week to do some work on their identities, because they've something came out of that said there was something else to be worked on in terms of either somebody outside there themselves that they have a problem with. Let's put that way. And or things that they've found, and hypnosis has helped. But they just want to try something else. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do 3 sessions with them next week. So I
brilliant.
I enjoyed it.
That's really good. Now, obviously, thank you very much for that, Sally. And anyone else, please feel free to raise your paw if you want to come up and have a chat. But Adam, obviously, you've mentioned many times your experience that you went through when you basically become a recluse. Now, obviously, to become a recluse, there's a lot of self-sabotaging going on in your mind of everything else that's around you. When you was in that sort of position, did you find you had multiple personalities? Did you feel like there was personalities? Was it just one? Or actually, a better way to probably mold this question is, post your therapy resolution, did you manage to see the multiple personalities that you once held in order to develop you into the charming young bloke that you are now?
Thank you for that, Graham. As I would say that when I was in that highly anxious state and dreaded any interaction with people, I had a dominant subpersonality and control at that point. And it was obvious now with hindsight that the positive intention behind, because you could say like being a recluse, not speaking with anyone, not going outside is hugely sabotaging, because how do you make friendships, relationships? How do you develop yourself if you don't go outside? But the positive intention behind that subpersonality that was very dominant at that point was to protect me. I saw fear and danger everywhere. And I had the evidence in my own life to prove it, because my heart would beat out of my chest and I would have these feelings of dread. And at that point, if you listen to your intuition, my intuition was saying, it's dangerous out there. Don't go out there. At some level, what specifically I was afraid of, many different things, and I've got a very visual way of thinking. So in detail, I could picture all the things that could go wrong and act as if they were actually happening in the present. And my dominant subpersonality at that point was to keep me safe. But clearly it wasn't sustainable. But I had all these other different subpersonalities or resource states. And I actually prefer the term resource states. And I've had the good fortune to interview Gordon Emerson. And he says, well, every state is resourceful or useful in the right context. And I believe that. So I had these kind of quite creative resource states, very imaginative resource states. Weirdly, I had this kind of dichotomy of being really believing that I could do like incredible things, but not having the confidence to leave my room. It was this real weird dichotomy. So I would have fantasies of all these kind of incredible future that I would have, but then struggle to go to the supermarket to get groceries. It was a really weird dynamic. So I had the ability to kind of drift into these kind of different subpersonalities, but at the same time, the dominant one was very anxious and it was keeping me safe. I would say a more recent experience of the role of subpersonalities in my life that have been self-sabotaging would be how I was under the influence of alcohol. Now, as you know, Graham, I've not drunk for about 3 years. Part of the reason for that is that around about 5% of the time of drinking, I would drink beyond, a certain line. And after that point, I'd have no idea what I was saying, what I was doing. And clearly that was a catalyst for a very different subpersonality to come out that was very arrogant, very cocky, very, kind of aggressive in some ways. Not who I normally am, but it would come out under those things. And then I would wake up the next day feeling this sense of kind of paranoia and guilt, not knowing what I've done, but then almost like the Hangover movies, have to kind of piece it together. And I said this and I did that, and complete amnesia of what was happening. And yeah, it caused lots of problems, loads of problems. So that was definitely a different personality in control under unique things. And for me, I decided, rather than try and do parts therapy and all that, just stop drinking. And therefore that ego state can never really be in the executive, because it was a unique catalyst for it to be in the executive. Normally it'd be kind of, and a metaphor, I know Mike Mandel uses the bungalow, and I really like Sally's, phrase, the team that she used from Matt there. I really like the bus, as a metaphor. You've got a bus with all the passengers, but there can only be one person driving the bus at any one point in time. But that doesn't mean that the passengers don't try and influence where the driver drives to. And quite often I see this with clients where they will describe a problem part, but their language isn't I, it's you. It's you've got to do this, you've got to do that, which tells me that the part responsible for some kind of an issue is trying to influence the part in the executive, but they're not in the executive. So that element of kind of driving the bus is a more useful metaphor for me than the bungalow. You know, you could say, right, whoever's opening the door is in the executive, but for me, driving the bus implies that there's control, there's influence at stake, but you've got all these other passengers, some of which are trying to influence where the bus is driving to. So yeah, can these subpersonalities, these ego states, these resource states mess up a life, sabotage a life? Totally. And I guarantee there is a large proportion of the prison population that are serving a sentence because of what one part did when it was triggered in a particular way. Could be drugs, could be alcohol, could be anger, could be whatever it is. But it made a choice under the influence of one ego state, and they're still paying the price for that now. And you know, that happens. And if you're serving a sentence in jail, that's going to feel like self-sabotage. You did that, you know, you're paying the price for it, but it didn't quite feel like you, because that's not normally the part that's in control, if that makes any sense at all.
100%, mate. You got, yeah, that absolutely. And it ties into what I said at the start, you know, these multiple personalities, the amount of times, you know, you see Toucan Van Damme's, someone who's literally just started drinking, like, how are you so pissed right now and talking in the way that you are? It makes complete sense. And you know, I'm sure if we did ask for a vote, there wouldn't be many people who could also relate to what you were saying as well. So no, thank you very much for that. It definitely assists to this whole chat of what we're going on to and stuff too. Sally, was you just about to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say I can sort of identify a little bit with Adam, because when I went through depression, you know, people were saying I was saying things and being really horrible, and I just couldn't remember it. I just could not remember saying the things they were telling me I was saying, and it wasn't me. That was who I identified with, you know, as I wouldn't say that, but I obviously did, and that then triggered me going back onto antidepressants for a short while, just to get back under control. I'm never going to go back on them again. I'll tell you that for nothing. But
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I sort of identified with that. It's just I couldn't remember saying what they were telling me I was saying, and I'd obviously said it because.
And this is the thing, isn't it? You know, we all get taught how to do multiplication and simple sums and what a adjective is and stuff like that, but no one ever tells you what could happen in later life. And there's so many puzzle pieces that you have to put together. It's like, you know, it's like when someone plays a prank on you, buys you the baked bean jigsaw. You're like, it's going to take me a while to puzzle this together. But once you do puzzle it together, you definitely know how to control it for the rest of your life, or you know, you've got a good shortcut there to the near future. So again, Sally, thank you for sharing that. Steve, welcome up to the stage. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. How are we all tonight? All right?
Fantastic.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
Tired, but fantastic.
That's good to hear. I was particularly interested in what Adam was saying just now about having interviewed Gordon Emerson. I'm not too well read up on Emerson, to be honest. Does Emerson believe that parts or ego states are ingrained neural pathways? Adam, what can you recall about that?
Yeah, I mean, his perception and the consistent bit between his work on ego states and he did a lot on ego states, you know, kind of known for that really before he kind of evolved into resource states. But I mean, effectively, I don't know where he stands on neural pathways, but he's very much that they are created in childhood. And part of the bit, you know, a lot of the theories on ego states is that trauma is what creates a different part. His thoughts are that's not necessary, you know. So he would use an example of if you learn how to play a musical instrument, then that part will come to mind, you know, to help you do that particular thing because it's uniquely, you know, kind of positioned to do that particular thing. And when I was talking with him, you know, we were chatting about how people have different voices in different contexts. So, you know, the way that you talk to someone in authority is different than how you communicate with a kitten or a baby, you know. So all of us have this ability to kind of fluidly move in and out. but he was very much against the idea that new parts are created later in life. It's kind of like that childhood period. All your parts are created, during that kind of period. And then it's just which ones are kind of utilized more often than not. So, his kind of idea is that, it's about having them work, in harmony, lots of kind of overlap with parts integration therapy. But I would have to do a bit more digging to kind of figure out where he actually stands on the neural pathway element.
Yeah, so I had an interesting experience the other night, actually. I caught a bunch of lads attacking my car, and I just went out and shouted at them. And a long time ago, I used to work on nightclub doors, and you get used to being in certain situations. But I didn't actually elicit that ego state. The ego state that seemed to come out, and I hadn't thought about this in years, was when I must have been about 7 or 8 years old. I'd been out with my cousins and we'd gone for a bike ride. We were all sort of little lads, and we came across a couple of other lads who were older, and they duffed us up a bit. And I just, all of a sudden, I had this sense of injustice, and somebody had, well, not violated me, violated my car. They kicked the wing mirror off it. And it was like, yeah, I don't want to be in this ego state. I want to be in a more resourceful ego state. But I just listening to the conversation, it just brought to mind something that Jordan Peterson says about, a good man, and this also applies to women as well. A good man is a monster that he has learned to tame. And I was thinking back to things like, the elements of the shadow self, integrating the darker parts of our personality. And can we say that, when we are in balance, we've got all these parts, I wouldn't say under control necessarily, but in the right place, but we can bring them out when we need to deploy them.
I think that's an excellent metaphor. And I think, I found naturally lots of different metaphors coming to mind. And one of them is the team, one of them, like a Navy ship, you've got the captain, you've got all these different kind of departments and things like that. But the reality is, you want to have the right resources accessible at the right times. A state that is a resourceful state that is violent, that monster, as Jordan Peterson would describe it. If someone's trying to kidnap your kids, that's the ego state I want coming out. An absolute bastard that will not let anything get in my way from stopping that from happening. So all of these things are highly resourceful in the right context. The problem is, and why we can call it self-sabotage, is that that ego state of being a monster can come out just because a guy comes home from football, their team's lost, and the monster comes out because he's pissed off. And rather than, attacking an injustice, you can, attack their own family member. This is some of the issues that can come when you've got these highly resourceful parts, but they've got nothing to do. And one lady I worked with, Steve, who she was in care throughout her childhood. So, different, kind of care homes and things like that. And she was quite often, either violently attacked, attempted to be sexually assaulted, or actually sexually assaulted throughout her kind of childhood years. And she developed a highly resourceful ego state that was tough as nails, like a rebel, like wouldn't take any shit. And that resourceful state was created when she needed it, and it helped keep her safe. People tried to take advantage. She wouldn't allow it. But then her life moved on, and she had a family, and she had settled. But she had this part that was highly resourceful, very capable, but didn't follow the rules, didn't want to follow the rules, would kind of rebel whenever there was a chance. So when she would want to do stuff, this part would come to the forefront and say, this sounds too boring. This sounds too safe. This sounds, and she would mess things up. And what I found is that, in my experience, the best thing that you can do is to give these parts something to do that aligns with what they're uniquely skilled to do. This part was tough and it was a rebel, almost had that polarity response. And this lady wanted to lose weight. And I said, look, can you think of all the people that would love it, absolutely love it, if you failed, that you tried to lose weight and, you didn't, they'd be the ones laughing behind your back. They'd be the ones mocking you. Can you think of those people? And she could. She knew exactly the people in her life that would love it if she failed. And then I brought out that ego state, that resource state. And I said, right, you're the person, you're the rebel. You're now going to take these people on. You're going to make sure that they don't get to laugh. They don't get to take advantage. And once that resource state has something to do that uniquely tapped into its nature, weirdly, you can say these subpersonalities have like a nature. They've got a purpose. It's almost kind of like a unique set of skills unique to that part. Then they're not bored anymore. But the key thing is, if you don't give them something to do that aligns with their nature, they're going to do what they do, and it can sabotage things in a different way. So yeah, I do think there is this element of getting them on side, but giving them a purpose. Bored ego states that are highly resourceful, they're going to try and do what they do in their own way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And as you were talking, it just reminded me of a client I had a little while ago, and she had issues around her cultural background and her accent. I'm sort of saying this to protect her potential identity. And she had this ego state that would come out sometimes, and it had a lot of rage, a lot of self-destruction. And we made some really, really good progress with her. In fact, I think she'd got to the point where she said, I'm okay now. And then 3 days after that, she started texting me. She was in a real panic because this I think what Mike Mandel would call evaded ego states had come back. And I'm very interested in how we go about reassigning those. You're talking about these tasks that these ego states can be given. Trying to find a good purpose for that ego state, which seemed to come from an issue when she was when she first came into this country, and then she met a lot of prejudice and this sort of thing. And looking at people who are highly narcissistic and controlling, not so much professionally. I'm sort of thinking, sort of personal things, not in my life, but in friends' lives, where they've had a controlling narcissistic partner. Who will then, just deny that they've done things, and it's almost like another part of them has taken over for a while. And I'm wondering if that could be regarded as a faded ego state as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some thoughts on this, but I appreciate I've been speaking a lot. Graham, what's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I just noticed Aaron's got her hand up. Sorry, I missed that one. I was looking at something. Yeah, so I believe for narcissism that definitely an ego state's created, very much as what we mentioned before, and the person doesn't realize it, because otherwise, if there wasn't, there's multiple aspects to this. You've got the person who doesn't realize they're being abused, and they kind of fall into that pit. But then you've also got someone who naturally becomes always the, what's the word now? It's always the person who's always the victim. But they look at it in every sort of area of their life. Now, let's say it's someone who was in a narcissistic relationship. They got let's just say they got moved away by the police, witness protection or whatever, not witness, but a protection program. They then go to somewhere else. They naturally end up finding themselves into another relationship where they're a victim, because their personality, or whether it's defensive, whether it's aggressive in their own right, ends up coming out as well, which then ends up creating that ability in order to magnetize the same reoccurrence of what's been happening already. And I truly believe that can be created very much so too. And when it is done, it's clearly just making that pattern of life Now, obviously, the other one is the personality that someone just doesn't realize what's going on. That set of blinkers to that person loves me. They're doing it for my best interest. They're doing it to help me. They're doing it to further me in whatever purpose, term, and reason. So there's multitude of avenues and answers towards that. Was that sort of what you was looking for there, Steve?
Yeah, it was about, and I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there. Yes, I mean, we were saying earlier on that some of these ego or these ego states generally come from early experience, especially in childhood. But I believe that some of them actually do come out later on, because you can look at some people's lives and there's nothing which is apparent from their childhood which would suggest that ego state had come from something early on, and it was a result of a more adult experience, maybe suffering narcissistic abuse or controlling the behavior or something like that, which then brings out that part in them. So maybe they do come out in adulthood as well.
I think they definitely could. But I mean, if we say there is 50 to 150 different, let's say, subpersonalities, some of these are going to be very, very uncommon, and also probably linked to certain key roles, and archetypes in some ways, because it doesn't really make sense to have subpersonalities that are very similar in nature. They're going to be different. And what determines, I think, a core personality of an individual is probably the dominant subpersonalities that are in control or in the ego, in the executive most of the time. For me, I look at, a metaphor that I find useful is that if you've just got these ego states, and being someone in business, you could think of ego states or resource states as being employees that you could never fire. Okay, they're just there. So evaded ego state would almost be like someone in the company that is dejected. They don't trust the company anymore. The company don't really trust them. So they've just got them some mind-numbing task and, in some kind of back office somewhere, nothing really to do. So how do you get them back on side? Well, you've got to communicate with them at some level. Quite often these evaded ego states have been neglected for so long that just being acknowledged, is a real olive branch, and that element of building genuine rapport, pacing their experience and saying, look, I just want to know that, I recognize that you're even there, and you've been neglected for a long time. And I know that maybe way back you did have positive intentions. You really did want to do something, but you haven't been given the opportunity to do that. And I think whether you use, Mandel's bunker metaphor or kind of the back office where they've got no role to play, or some kind of, another metaphor I use quite a lot in parts therapy is you've got the castle, you've got the kingdom and or the kind of the boundaries with the moat, and then you've got these kind of villages, somewhere out in the kingdom, but they're miles away from any kind of influence. Evaded ego state is kind of like that. They exist, but they have very little role to play. Well, if you can bring them back into the fold, if you can kind of give them a role to play, the opportunity is, I mean, a evaded ego state isn't really doing any damage because they're kind of hidden away, but they're not really contributing in any way either. So if you can get them back on side, if you can figure out what their positive intention was, why are they so afraid? Why are they so, dejected? Why are they not involved in any way? And you can get them back on side. One of the powerful things that, I tend to do when I'm working with either evaded ego state or a troublesome ego state, a conflicted part, is say, well, look, what if we kind of give you even more significance than you've had before? You find out the positive intention, what they either are trying to do or wanted to do in the past, and figure out, and I think this is where the artistry comes in what we do as therapists. If you can figure out how to meet that intention, if you can meet that need in an elegant way where they get to feel important again, because the clue in ego states is ego. They want to feel significant. They want to feel like they matter. They want to make a difference at some level. And if you can give them that role to play, wow, suddenly you've got someone back on the team rather than this kind of, person on the sidelines just kind of disagreeing with everything because they feel disgruntled. And we've all worked with members of staff, whether it's, in a company or whatever it might be, that wasn't on board. They didn't believe in the mission. They didn't believe in the company. They're always kind of naysaying and neglecting. It's kind of like a evaded ego state. But if you can get them back on board again, what an opportunity that is.
Yeah, Adam, that was the idea behind the team and the identity exercise. That they may not be playing a big role now, but they're there in the background. But if you can, I don't know, increase their confidence, I guess, or bring them back to, in some way, then they can contribute more than some other.
Contribution is key, Sally, because they all these ego states, all these resource states, they've got a role to play. Okay. Yeah. And if we can figure out what unique role they're gifted to help in some way and give them that through design rather than chance, because the thing is, quite often the thing that they sometimes as a coping mechanism, but the thing that they did probably at the time when they were created, or the first major problem they have to solve, typically they're repeating that strategy just because it worked. There is this mentality of, if it's not broke, why try and fix it? But things have changed. We're not the same people we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And therefore you've got these kind of ego states trying to use the same strategies that worked well for them once in these different strategies. And if that's not working, or if you've got inner dialogue criticizing them all the time, and they're just kind of feeling, really unwanted, which is a lot of the case in these kind of conflicted parts, they've got a choice. They can either slump off and kind of not do very much, or they can become more resourceful, but they'll just be more rebellious and kind of forceful in their own way, which is what causes these conflicted kind of ego states. You see it in weight loss all the time. There is a part that really wants to be healthy, lose weight. There's another part that craves gratification and pleasure, and they're a bit of a hedonist. And unless you can reconcile the two, they're going to be constantly sabotaging each other if you've got two very dominant, resourceful states in some way. Irene, welcome up on the stage.
Hello, thank you. It's a great chat. I like this one.
I think it was your idea, Irene, wasn't it? Didn't you message us and say we need to talk more about parts?
Yes, because I'm finding that I find I've noticed when I'm doing some sessions that it comes into my head, if I knew more about parts therapy, that I might use it now. There's a little bit of I don't know whether it's self-sabotage, actually. I was listening to what you were saying, and I've got so many questions. But what I was thinking then was, there's a little part in me that sort of says that what are my skills in like negotiation? Because this is what someone did ask the question in a forum. That I've actually seen a couple of questions this week in two different forums, where actually one asked, was there actually a need for parts therapy at all? And quite a lot of people said no, that they don't use it. But then in another, there were people asking for advice, and I was reading closely and seeing what they were saying, and a negotiation came up quite a bit, and I was like, gosh, I don't know whether I've got any negotiation skills. Probably like with a couple of kids I have, but how can I use that as part of parts therapy?
But what if there was a resourceful part that is very good at negotiation? So effectively, then you would want that part that's, and the thing is, like, any skill can be improved upon with practice and technique. For me, working in, kind of public relations and, sales and influence for a long time, those negotiating skills are quite good. But I would say to those questions in the forum, is parts therapy essential? Well, nothing's essential. You can find workarounds, but in my experience, really useful. It's a really useful toolkit, particularly if phrases like struggle come up, if phrases like sabotage come up, If there's frustration that people kind of undermine their own things, parts therapy is the dominant set of tools that I would use to do that. Does negotiation help? Massively. But one of the key things where people get it wrong in terms of negotiating with conflicted parts, they don't get them in the executive first before they start negotiating with them. So they're not really negotiating with that ego state. And also, they don't build rapport with that ego state before they start negotiating. So in my experience, the three essential ingredients at the negotiation, which Irene guaranteed you have these three skills, guaranteed. Can you build rapport? Well, yeah, we all can build rapport with people. We can establish rapport quickly. And one of the ways of building rapport with an ego state, a resource state, is by thanking it, acknowledging it, thanking it, and just saying, like, I just want you to know I appreciate what you're trying to do, what your intention is. And then you need to elicit the intention. And in my experience, when I've tried to second guess, like normally anxiety comes from the positive intention of protection at some level. And quite often I'll use the metaphor of an overprotective mother or a bodyguard that's kind of like too quick to kind of like, perceive everything as a threat and that kind of stuff that would cause chaos. But sometimes I get it wrong. My guess as to what the positive intention isn't the case. And sometimes I think it's protection, but actually, it's something else, or I think it's hedonism and it's something else. So you need to build sufficient rapport and then genuinely ask that part, what are you trying to do here? What's the positive intention? What do you want for, this person? And then listen and really listen and probe a bit more. But you can only do that when they're in the executive. Otherwise, you're hearing a different ego state's idea of what their positive intention is. And then you need to propose something with that part, which is, basically in sales language, it would be what we'd call a trial close or, elicitation. You would say, if there was a way that we can meet that need that you've had all this time, this intention, in a way that doesn't cause all this chaos that you've accidentally and unintentionally been causing, would you be receptive to that? Would you be happy to have a more significant role than you've had before if it means that you can actually do what you've always wanted to do, but without all the unintended side effects that you've clearly been causing? And at that point, if the true intention really is to help in some way, they're normally on board with that. And then you've got to figure out what that thing is. And the best person to do that, or the best part to do that, is the ego state itself. And say, right, if you were to help in this way without causing this chaos that we've shown you, how would you do that? And normally they can do it. And if they can't, then you would bring in perhaps a creative or a problem-solving ego state into the mix. And then you get that part to help. Because the key thing in my experience is that you want teamwork within the ego states. You want a huge amount of collaboration, a lot of, back and forth, so that they're not trying to do it on their own, that they are genuinely working as a team in there. And then you need to future pace it and say, right, let's see if this would actually work. What's the next few weeks? What's the next few months going to look like? Now, although that's a negotiation, it doesn't really feel like a negotiation, because all you're doing is you're figuring out what that, let's imagine there was an employee and the employee is really creative, but they're not really in a creative role. So they're spending all day doodling because that represents creativity for them. And if their boss said to them, look, I can see you're not looking very happy right now. Can I just figure out what really stimulates you? What really lights you up? What makes you feel good? And they're like, creativity. I just like being creative. And they say, well, I don't think you're in a creative role at the moment, which is probably why you're doodling so much. If there was an opportunity for you to be really creative in the role and help the company and not waste time, would you be receptive to that? Like, if that person in a company really was creative and they love doing that, they're not going to say no to that, because they get to have more significance and more importance than they do before, whereas they're kind of feeling like a spare part at the moment. It is a negotiation, but it doesn't really feel like a negotiation if it's done well, if that makes sense.
Thank you. That makes it sound a lot easier.
Yeah, and it really is, but it's practice, and I think because you've got 2 kids, Irene, I would say you've been honing this skill all the time. You know, you'd be saying, yeah, if they want to do something, it's kind of like, okay, well, we can do this, but are you happy to do that? Like you're going to have high level negotiation skills without you knowing it, and it's just using that within this context. And you know, it's useful to do. The one thing I would say, in my experience, parts therapy and negotiation is easier to do on other people than it is to do on yourself. In my experience, it's one of those things because effectively it gets a little bit complicated if you're associated, dissociated, negotiation, all this kind of thing, conscious, unconscious. It's quite challenging to do. And that's the kind of thing where I think even if you're a really, really competent hypnotherapist, because there is that kind of back and forth, it's good to find someone else to work with you on that rather than attempt to do it through self-hypnosis. That's not the case with a lot of other types of hypnotherapy, but I think in parts negotiation, parts integration, you know, ego state work, definitely finding, you know, a competent, capable other person really does help in that context. Don't know if you'd agree with that or not, Graham.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to find that context, and you've got to be able to bring it in order to assist them. Irene, some really, really great questions there, and Adam being, this is your forte, isn't it, Adam? This is absolutely the way you love to work, and I know you've done a hell of a lot of research with it as well. And obviously, I want to put a personal thanks there to Irene as well, due to the fact that she's actually kind of messaged us to give us an idea of something else as well, which we ask for week in, week out. So if there is a subject, even if you're not up talking much or anything like that, if you are new to therapy and you see these subjects somewhere and you wish to hear us talk about it more, please just drop us a message via Instagram, via Facebook, anything like that. And it's really, really great to bring up these conversations too. I'm aware. I've just become aware of the time. Actually, we've not got too much longer left, unless Adam wants to carry on talking. But I've got to shoot this evening. But yeah, so let's just do a little bit of summarising. So multiple personalities, self-sabotaging. It is multiple personalities, self-sabotage in our lives. In a degree, yes. If you do not have control of whatever resources, personalities, whichever bracket you want to put it into, parts, if you don't have control of them, they can very easily self-sabotage you. Every client I always have, I like to always tell them to talk to themselves only a little bit, whether it's to egg themselves on, whether it's to tell them to doing too much to themselves. Now, obviously, talking doesn't mean they need to be walking down the road nattering to themselves, because people will think they have got multiple personalities. However, just literally openly talking into your thoughts and listening to your thoughts as well. If you can achieve that, then you can also you can find the variations in between how and where you're working as well. So what with it, as a therapist, as Adam said, actually challenge these different areas, give it a little command and see if you can get a response from each one. If you can get a response, it's somewhere to be able to work with. If you can create that diversity within it, then you're definitely going to be on the right path to be able to make some form of change. And if the person can become aware of what they are doing to be able to control it again, as I just mentioned, then you're also going to be on that right path. Steve, did you unmute yourself to say something at all?
Yeah, just to pick up on what Adam was saying about, and I agree that it's not always easy to do ego state work on ourselves, because getting that disassociation is the key to it. And one way which I found has made it easier is to bring in the idea of the higher ego state, if you like, the supreme ego state that can have authority and, if you like, managerial powers over the other ego states, and get that part to communicate, because then you are disassociating, because you're watching that part dealing with the other parts. What would that part say? How would it manage this part? You're not doing it yourself. And I found that to be quite useful.
I would echo that sentiment. I kind of liken it to, the alpha in a tribe. There is a dominant ego state, which all the other ego states are very responsible for, responsive to. And, that can certainly help. And it's good to get that, is a useful tactic, Irene, in terms of your negotiation. Sometimes if I tend to use a room as an extra level of disassociation. Can the part responsible for this please enter the room? And then you observe it a different thing. But you can also bring in as the negotiator, the wisest and most influential part of your subconscious mind. Can they enter the room and allow them to negotiate on your behalf? And then you've kind of got that, as Steve says, that level of disassociation, but also influence there. I had a really interesting case where it was actually in the middle of a kind of fast phobia cure, but this kind of part came into the mix that called itself strong, and it was just an absolute bully. It was and that was the most influential, dominant subpersonality. Was almost like a rogue dictator. I liken him to kind of like a King Jong-il, kind of character. And that is also a possibility, that actually the most influential subpersonality isn't the most competent, but it's dominant from a different way. And sometimes, like if you remember your school days, sometimes the most influential person in the classroom wasn't exactly the most intelligent, the most kind, but it was dominant in some way, and that can happen inside our own heads. But like any bully, you can kind of call them out, and quite often they're going to be afraid. So there is that ability to kind of negotiate. But just to summarize, I guess, bringing the room to an end. For me, the difference between multiple personalities and subpersonalities are they aware of each other? And in dissociative identity disorder, they're not aware. It's kind of like when that personality is in the executive, no one else knows what's going on. It's that Jekyll and Hyde moment. Occasionally, we might experience in very brief moments. Someone with DID experiences that all the time. What we're talking about mainly here is resource states, and we can drift in and out, but we're aware of it. We're aware of what kind of person we are. When those people were kind of harassing Steve's car, he knew that he was in the ego state, and sometimes you feel like you're in the right ego state and the resourceful state, and sometimes you're not, but you're aware of it. And that's really what these kind of parts are. And I think, to sum up, can they sabotage our lives? Absolutely they can. But that's also an opportunity, because the opposite of sabotaging is really kind of alignment and empowerment. And if you can get these conflicted parts on side, what a great opportunity. If you can turn a rowdy classroom into a team of kids that are all kind of pulling in the right direction, or if you can turn that kind of mutinous ship into like a well-performing ship, there's such a big opportunity, in having conflicted parts or evaded ego states working for you rather than against you. And I think that's why it's such an exciting part. And the more I do therapy, the more I feel it comes down to these kind of parts not working in alignment with each other. So for me, I never set out to kind of learn so much about parts therapy and ego state, but because it produces results and really helps, I can't help but think it's such a useful model that, as therapists, if you don't have it in your toolkit, get it in your toolkit, because it really is helpful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you've got to keep being able to work on that way. And the other thing as well is, you don't have to go very, very deep with it. You can utilize it against any modality in order to assist you. If you're doing a modality and something gets stuck, tap into the part and you may find that something helps get free. So on that note, Adam, very great to share the stage with you. Again, likewise with anyone else who's came up to talk or simply just joined us. If you're new, we're here every week, 9 till 10. And talking a different topic every single week. We usually have Rowan with us, but again, he couldn't make it this week. And yeah, like I said, always good to connect, always good to chat. If anyone is interested in more CPD, I've got one of my Hypnosis online meetups this weekend with Beryl Comer, talking about working with relationships. I know a few people from the room will be joining us. And Adam, you doing anything in the current week?
Lots of hypnosis stuff. Yeah, I've got lots of different clients over the next week or so. So a lot of that. And I've been a bit lax on my podcast. So anyone that listens to the Hypnotist podcast, you've probably seen less episodes than normal. So I need to raise my game on that. I need to get the right ego state in control to get me back on track there.
Awesome. Everyone, do take care. We'll see you again next week. And if you need anything in the meantime, just message us on Instagram. Take care. Cheerio, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Thanks.
Anytime,
Bye.
Steve.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.